So welcome everyone to this webinar. My name is Fernando Pinillos. I'm from Europarc Federation Communications Department, and I will be the facilitator of the webinar today. A quick instructions, some basic webinar rules. Well, first of all, I remind you that this is a joint initiative between IUCN and Europarc Federation. This webinar has been brought to you by both institutions. And during the webinar, we will follow some basic rules. So just bear in mind that the webinar is being recorded. So may you don't want to appear in the recordings because the recordings will later be published online. Make sure that you stop your camera or just start or stop it at your convenience, okay? During the webinar, any question that you may have, you are welcome to write it in the chat of Zoom, in the chat box, okay? In the end of the webinar, we will have a discussion, and with all the questions collated, we will ask them to the speakers, and we might open them for discussion, okay? Depends on how the webinar goes. Remember to address the speakers that you would like to indicate the speaker that you would like to address when you write the question, please. So if participants' live interventions are allowed in the end, you will need to raise your hand so we can see you and the moderator will give you the floor, okay? Right now, you don't have the right to unmute yourselves or share a screen, so just the speakers have, okay? In today's agenda, we have a short introduction from Europarc Federation with, with a perspective from the marine environment and the protected areas. We have also a short introduction from IUCN explaining the plastic challenge perspective. We will set the scene with inputs from the European Commission, DG ENVI, and on EU policies. And we will see two case studies, one from IUCN, the Plastic Waste Free Initiative, and the Messy Litter Project from the University of Barcelona. A short introduction to Europarc. The Europarc Federation was founded in 1973 with the aim of supporting protected area managers to better do their job. We represent different types of parks around Europe, national parks, regional nature parks, marine protected areas, and urban and peri-urban parks. Our vision, sustainable nature, valued by people, Europarc is articulated through 8 different sections across Europe. We have 3 main offices, the headquarters being located in Regensburg, Germany, and then we have an office in Spain, Barcelona, and another office in Brussels, where the majority of the policy work is carried out. We're a network of more than 400 members scattered across 40 countries, and we represent a wide variety of institutions, from governmental organizations, protected areas itself, NGOs, and other types of institutions. Our work is focused on facilitating the networking and the knowledge exchange between our members. And we organize and publish different conferences, seminars and workshops, commissions and task forces, training for protected area managers and stakeholders. We collect case studies and we publish them online for exchanging them among the members. Also, we do the same with toolkits. We publish policy papers and we run webinars like the one you're attending today. Let me give you a quick overview of the plastic production and how it affects the environment, the marine environment globally and in Europe. So the global production of plastic has increased since the 60s 20 times until pretty much today. We have reached 322 million tons in 2015, and this amount is expected to double again in the next 20 years. If you see this graph, by 2040, we will be over the 1,500. This is the forecast that we have, so it's not really promising. The production of plastic in Europe by 2015 was mainly used for packaging in its 60%, including food packaging, and on minor scales was is used for electrical and electronic equipment, automotive, agriculture. Plastic help us in isolating our houses and with many other functions, being a really essential component in our society today. Okay. However, maybe the conception of recycling is really spread, but the reality is that not a large amount of plastic is being recycled in the world. So the demand of recycled plastic in the market is only the 6% of the total. Okay. The sources of plastic, when we are speaking about marine pollution, come both from land and sea. 80% comes from land, approximately 20% from the sea, mainly from shipping. From land, it can reach the sea through wastewater, especially plastic coming from the industry and the cosmetics, also through runoff and wind and atmospheric fallout. In the EU, up to 500,000 tons of plastic enter the ocean every year. And we have to bear in mind that from the whole amount of marine litter that we find, 80% is made of plastic. An overview as well on the affections to the marine environment that plastic has. So in the world, 700 marine species are threatened by plastics. 17% of them are listed as threatened or critically endangered by the IUCN. And the biggest proportion of animals that suffer from plastic impacts are in descending order: birds, fishes, invertebrates, such as filtering animals like mussels, marine mammals, and Indian sea turtles. So plastic particles affect differently to different group of animals, to different strata on the food webs as well. Is an example of size does matter, because we divide the plastics in microplastics, nanoplastics, microplastics, and macroplastics. And in these different ranges, they affect to different groups, okay? MPAs, as it can be obvious, they are not exempt of the influence of plastics. And even though they are away from the source of pollution, plastics are scattered and are distributed all over the planet through marine currents, okay? And the main impacts on the marine environment and marine ecosystems are due to entanglement through fishing nets in a big proportion and other plastic items. Plastic also affects the marine ecosystems by the ingestion of marine fauna, which can affect behavior, energy consumption, and could lead to poisoning by the chemicals that the plastic is produced with. Plastic is a dangerous component because it bioaccumulates and enters the food webs and is capable to reach humans. It also produces shifts in marine communities, assemblages, and of course it has a negative impact in the aesthetics of seascapes or marine areas, affecting as well to tourism, as well as other socioeconomic impacts and other impacts that are not as well known as of today. A quick overview, and I don't want to stand any longer, and I would like to give the floor to Alberto Arroyo, who is the responsible for policy and programs at the European Regional Office of the IUCN. Alberto, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I am struggling with the technical challenges. Sorry about that. I am now going to just very shortly tell you a little bit about are you seeing the right screen with the, okay, thank you very much. So I will just keep it short, just to tell you a little bit about how these two agendas that in principle look like not very related, I think that it's good that we start to think how we are going to relate them. For this purpose, I have prepared a short presentation with some pieces of information, and you will see that it's mainly pictures, because it's mainly just to give some glimpse, some information about what are the key policy areas and how this is they are related. I work for IUCN. My name is Alberto Arroyo-Snell, and I'm responsible for policy and for program in the European Regional Office in Brussels. I am actually a protected areas specialist by profession, so I'm much closer to the protected areas, to the plastic discussion. But at the moment, I'm dealing with very different issues, and actually one of my jobs is to join the dots of all the different agendas that are out there, especially working with different sectors. This is a little bit my motto and also the motto of IUCN: integration. In this context, I want to just let you know about some of the...
Sorry, Alberto. Yes, you can use the presenters mode, because we were seeing your slide and the next slide. So you go on the
Okay, can you
bottom bar, right by the minus sign, you click there.
Yes. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. It's just I'm
no
trying
problem.
to see.
And now you have to choose on the upper bar. You can use slideshow. Should be that one. Yeah, there you are.
Okay, thank you very much again. Sorry for the technical challenges. So, well, what you can see here is some of the work that we have been doing on plastics, related with plastics, which I think is just helpful to see, as I was saying, how important is to join the different agendas. We are the IUCN, we are working for conservation of the nature. In a way, you could wonder, what are we doing with plastics? Well, this is a fundamental agenda. And as I was saying before, the most important probably is to try to join the different agendas. What you see here is some of the work that we have been doing during the past years. In particular, on the left, you see a report about the primary microplastics in the oceans that actually was led by Joao, who will speak later on. And one of the key discoveries that we got from this report is that 30% of the microplastics, primary microplastics in the oceans, are from the tires, and 30% are from the textile industry. The rest is a mix. So that's already giving an idea of where should our efforts be in a way. We are also working very much with the private sector. Following this report, actually, as you see, we started a strong collaboration also with the tire industry. You see in the middle of the screen this European tire platform that we are now part of, and we are trying to get as much as possible to solve the issue of the microplastic from tires, which is a challenging one. And we also try to identify all the different policies, in particular the policies that are affecting marine plastic litter. Again, a little bit of a challenge. In any case, this might look a little bit far from the protected areas work, especially if we are thinking in addressing the sources, the producers, which is probably the main issue to address. Europarc is actually full of experts on protected areas, and maybe other issues are also interesting to tackle. We know very well the need to address the other issues from the protected areas perspective. We know very well that the only way to really get conservation working is to make sure that we work together with all the rest of the stakeholders. For example, at European level, this will mean that we need to work very much on the common agricultural policy. This is the real fundamental policy to tackle the terrestrial conservation in the European Union. If you make sure that the common agricultural policy is really adequate, and that's maybe a little bit not exactly conservation. If we think in the international agenda, let us remember that the challenges are huge. If you think in the CBD zero draft that now we have over the table, we have an update from August only. And this, let's remember also that is coming after the biodiversity strategy of the European Union has been presented, which means that we have the strategy in Europe before the global draft. In a way, let's remember that we are going to serve as an example. What happens in Europe is going to be important for the rest of the world. So on the one hand, we have all these incredible ambitious targets, such as the 30% protected areas by 2030. And on the other hand, we are having challenges to achieve these targets. And let us remember, by the way, that the marine protected areas target is especially ambitious. We want to get to 30% of the marine protected areas by 2030. And at the moment, we have 10 in the best case, which means we are multiplying per 3 the marine protected areas. And let's remember again that the designation is relatively easy. The real challenge is the management, for which we really need to tackle the other sectors. Let's call it this way. Now, we are going to speak today about the circular economy discussion that is happening in the European Union. The plastics agenda is very active in the European Union, and in particular the circular economy. I suggest you to listen very carefully to Michael now. He's working in the circular economy area in the European Commission and in DG Environment, and he's going to say very interesting issues about the European Green Deal, for example, one of the key issues that we have now in the agenda. At the moment, actually, and now I need to change to my next slide, if I am able to do that. Yes, here you see the structure of the commission, of the current commission. And it's important to realize that we have now a good moment for environment. Here you see highlighted in red, firstly below, the Commissioner for Environment, Oceans and Fisheries, Mr. Virginijus Sinkevicius. Let's remember again an opportunity here, following also the previous commission. We have a commissioner that is following both the environment and the oceans agenda. So that's easier to tackle jointly. But more important than that, probably, Mr. Timmermans on top, what you see there also in a red square, he's the executive vice president of the commission, and he's responsible for the Green Deal. So the Green Deal is at that level. Environment has never been that high in the agenda in the European Commission, and this is an opportunity, and it provides also opportunities for example, better funding, as we have recently seen in the Green Deal call from Horizon 2020. A lot of money just for the Green Deal. This is what is coming. And I think it's good to remember that we are having a good moment. Also the agenda for the environment. Also the agenda of Mr. Timmermans is very varied. It includes agriculture, transport, energy, environment. Well, not easy to join all these different elements, but one of the key issues exactly that we should be doing, joining the dots. And in this sense, exactly this seminar today or this webinar today is trying to join these different agendas and try to that we become a little bit more aware of different issues that are relevant for the environmental agenda. And with this said, I just hope that we will have a very good discussion today, and I give the word to Fernando, who will introduce Michael. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alberto. And I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, who is Michael Papadogiannakis from the European Commission, Environment Directorate General. Michael is an expert in industrial policy and environmental issues. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Good morning to everybody, and many thanks to the organizers for the invitation and also for the introduction. I will try to present to you today the major policy instruments that we have in the European Union for tackling plastic pollution of the oceans, but also how these policy instruments and initiatives interact with each other and how they are going to be hopefully even more strengthened by the Green Deal. By the way, many thanks, Alberto, for the very eloquent and very illustrative introduction and explanation of the Green Deal and also of the hierarchical and administrative issues. Let me try to share my screen. Does it work?
Yes.
Okay.
Apologies for the gray boxes that you may see in over the screen, but this is a technical bug that we cannot fix. So I hope there is no inconvenience with this.
Okay, let me see if I can change the. Okay. Can you see the second slide now?
Yes.
Okay. So I was saying that I will present briefly the main policies that we have in the European Union, and of course, the main and first policy instrument talking about marine litter is the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which was adopted in 2008 and requires that member states ensure that the quantities and composition of marine litter do not harm coastal and marine ecosystems. How to do that? They need to monitor and assess marine litter. They need to set targets, and they need to define good environmental status, how they interpret good environmental status. And of course, last but not least, they need to take measures to ensure that this good environmental status for marine litter, that is to say that litter does not cause harm to coastal and marine ecosystems, is achieved. Now, you see different policies which have been adopted either before or after the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. and which we will go through very quickly during this presentation. You will see the waste legislation, which pre-exists the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, but which has been reinforced for marine litter, port reception facilities for sea-based source of litter, the strategy for plastics in 2018, regional and international cooperation, and last but not least, funding. Now, the European Green Deal will have an impact on marine litter as well, and the expected impact is that it will bring even more coherence and effectiveness in marine litter policies. Of course, as Alberto also explained, the European Green Deal is an overarching policy and ambition, and it's relevant for marine litter at least for three reasons, or let me put it that way, at least with regard to three of its key dimensions. And these three key dimensions which are directly relevant for marine litter are the zero pollution ambition, which will be reflected in the Zero Pollution Action Plan that we would like to issue next year. And the Zero Pollution Action Plan is not necessarily about new legislation. It could lead to new legislation. It's about better use of the existing legislation, identification of gaps, but also it's about improvement of monitoring and of the coherence of monitoring with the monitoring and outlook tool that it will contain. Again, the time does not allow me to go into the details. I'm trying to capture. I've tried to capture the main points in the slides, and then we can have questions if necessary. Now, the second component of the Green Deal, which is directly relevant for marine litter, is the circular economy. And of course, the circular economy is in a way related to litter because of the waste management issues and because of the single-use plastics directive that we will see in more detail later on. It is also relevant for marine litter because it has the sustainable products policy as a key component, as an integral part, and sustainable products and extended producer responsibility, which is the last line of the slide, are major instruments for reducing waste from products and therefore reducing plastic litter in our seas and coasts. And a third element of the Green Deal, which is directly relevant for marine litter, is, and of course very relevant for the webinar of today, is the biodiversity strategy. I will not go into details. Alberto also mentioned these 30%, which out of which 10% we would like to have strictly protected in terms of marine protected areas. And the Council of the European Union recently adopted conclusions on the biodiversity strategy and committed to work towards a global agreement to reduce plastic marine litter. We will come back to this point at the end of the presentation. As we said, the Green Deal has a much broader and horizontal aspect and dimension, and we do hope that it will bring about a change in concept and attitude towards environment and environmental spending. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are several EU policy instruments which have not necessarily been invented or put in place, if you want, for marine litter, but which have been adapted to the emerging needs with regard to reducing plastic litter. And one of these major policy instruments is the Waste Framework Directive, which was amended recently, two years ago, and which has now provisions directly related to litter. Again, I will not go into details, but these are the main new principles, if you want, or new provisions, which are also reflected in the Single-Use Plastics Directive. Now, most of you or all of you have probably heard about this directive that we will see in more detail later on, but probably what less people know is that this directive would not have been possible without the monitoring data that were produced thanks to the Marine Strategy Framework Directive and to the endeavors and efforts taking place in the regional seas conventions around Europe: Barcelona Convention, Bucharest Convention, HELCOM in the Baltic, and OSPA in the Northeast Atlantic. So these data, which are there, because we monitor the marine environment, enabled the adoption of the marine strategy of the Single-Use Plastics Directive, because on the basis of this data, we selected the 10 single-use plastic items that we find most frequently on beaches, and these items with the fishing gear, with the waste fishing gear, cover 70% of marine litter. Now, because time is running, I will go through very quickly the Single-Use Plastic Directive, which is a major policy instrument, not only with regard to its scope, but with regard to its ambition, with regard to the innovation that it brings, and which has been imitated already throughout the world in various ways. You see that it has a marine environment protection objective, it has a circular economy objective, and it has a single market objective. It creates obligation for member states which need to transpose it in national legislation, as is the case with all European directives, but it also brings obligations for the Commission, a lot of obligations, because there are many issues, technical issues, which need to be clarified, and this we're trying to do through guidelines and through standards. Again, there's no time here to go into the details. The important thing to keep in mind is that the technical work for the clarification of the open issues of the Single-Use Plastic Directive is ongoing. The Single-Use Plastic Directive covers through a variety of measures, a variety of products, and it might create some confusion. What is banned? Where do we have marketing requirements, and so on and so forth. I have tried to capture in the next slide the main, let's say, provisions in terms of scope. You will see that wherever there were adequate substitutes, the single-use plastic products were banned. In other cases, we had the product design requirements, or we had marking requirements. And of course, what is very important is the extended producer responsibility, which means that the producers will have to cover the cost of waste management, awareness raising, including, and this is very important, for fishing gear. Now, another issue that is hotly debated, so to speak, is biodegradability. There are many claims about biodegradable plastics, and we need not, let's say, restrict or ban, but instead use innovative biodegradable materials. I would like to clarify that as far as the Single-Use Plastics Directive is concerned, there is no marine biodegradable material. There is no distinction. On the other hand, we do acknowledge that there is a lot of research and a lot of progress in this respect. And there will be a review of the directive by 2027 to see to which extent it is, let's say, justified or necessary to have exemptions for certain materials or certain products because of their biodegradability. So this will happen in 2027, but in the meantime, much earlier, next year, hopefully, the Commission will issue a policy framework for biodegradable and bio-based plastics, where the idea is to identify in which applications it might be, let's say, meaningful to talk about biodegradable plastics and have such biodegradable plastics used and promoted. And of course, towards on our way to 2027, to work towards, let's say, a broadly acceptable view about what is marine biodegradability. Again, fishing gear, lost fishing gear is a major issue. Lots of harm produced because of ghost fishing. It is in the scope of the Single-Use Plastics Directive, and there are actions already ongoing. Note in particular the national minimum collection targets with a view to setting an EU-wide collection target when the data is available, increased monitoring and reporting, and there is also work on preparation of standard for circular design of fishing gear so that it is more easily collected and recycled. We said that the circular economy is relevant because of its link with waste management and the Single-Use Plastics Directive, but it is also relevant because in the latest Circular Economy Action Plan, which was published in March 2020, there is an explicit reference to microplastics and the need to work more to acquire more knowledge, but also to take measures. Measures, by the way, announced already in the strategy for plastics in 2018. These measures would concern microplastics directly and intentionally used in products like cosmetics, paints, or other products. And for this type of microplastics, we already have a procedure ongoing under the European Chemicals Agency. A lot of technical work has taken place. The outcome is that there should be some restrictions. Now, the scope and the type of these restrictions are being discussed and in the technical and socioeconomic committees, and we might have Commission proposals for restrictions as early as in mid-2021. The other type of microplastics is those produced from products during the life cycle, like tires, like from tires, textiles, and the pre-production pellets. For these microplastics also, we are preparing measures, and these measures will be based on a study. This study will be launched hopefully before the end of this year by DG Environment, and it will investigate options for reducing emissions of microplastics from other sources, such as tires, textiles, and pre-production plastic pellets. And on the analysis of these options, we will base, of course, the possible even legislative proposals by the Commission, but this remains to be seen. Port Reception Facilities Directive is another example of a legislative instrument which pre-existed the discussion on marine litter and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, but which was adapted to the recent needs, and a major, let's say, review of the directive took place. We now speak of the new Port Reception Facilities Directive, which was adopted 2019, and it is very relevant for combating marine litter because it broadens its scope in terms of including all vessels, and it introduces the no special fee requirement, which will support the increased delivery of waste in ports. Now, this is where we started, and this is where we also start our ending of this presentation, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. There are recent developments after almost 12 years of research and reporting and investment of human and financial resources. We have a lot of results to show for marine litter. I will only mention the threshold for beach litter adopted earlier this year by the member states experts. That is to say, the member states experts agreed that it is not acceptable to have more than 20 litter items per 100 meters of coastline. And this, of course, very relevant, not only for marine protected areas, but for all coasts and seas. I see time is running out, so I will not spend too many words on our regional cooperation and international, which are essential. Again, regional cooperation in particular through and within the regional sea conventions around Europe, which all have regional action plans that the Commission and the European Union support in many ways. But international cooperation means also participation in other international fora such as G7, G20, support for the International Maritime Organization Action Plan Against Marine Litter, and last but not least, active participation in the United Nations Environment Assembly. And by the way, talking about United Nations Environment Assembly, the next one is expected for 2021, and the European Union is supporting the preparation of a legally binding global instrument to cover the gaps, mainly in the early stages of the life cycle of plastic production and plastic waste management. Well, let's see how it goes. There's a lot of support, but of course, this is not something that will be very easy, but it's a very ambitious and necessary move of the international community to tackle marine litter. This is the end of my presentation. Another topic that I did not cover, because I think we have a whole presentation for that, is the EU funding for marine litter. There are many projects of various types, and in particular for marine litter in connection with marine protected areas, there are two projects. There's one project about which we're going to hear more details, Medici Litter, but there are also other EU-funded projects like Act for Litter in the Mediterranean, which is finished, and Plastic Busters, which is ongoing in the Mediterranean, which also deals with marine litter in marine protected areas. But these are only a few examples of the many, many projects that we finance in this respect. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mihail, for this very interesting overview. And I would like to remember the participants that they can write up their questions in the chat box, because we will not stop during presentations, but we will collate and review all the questions, or at least all the questions possible, in the final discussion at the end of the webinar. Okay, the same, if you want to intervene in the final discussion, please raise your hand using the hand raise virtual button, and we will try to give you the floor as soon as possible. Thank you. And I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, who is Joao Sousa. He is a Marine Project Officer at IUCN and is working on plastic debris mitigation. Joao, the floor is yours.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you see the presentation full screen? No. Okay. Skype, share screen. This one. Share.
Yeah, it's coming. We can see it on notes notes mode. We can see, yeah, now it's full screen. Thank you.
Okay. So good morning. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to present IUCN's work, mainly the plastic waste free island project. This is our ongoing biggest project at the moment. I just start quickly to, I don't think if this is blocking the view or not of the presentation. Probably it is.
It's fine right now.
Okay. So IUCN is a division focused by teams. Leads me to introduce to the department where I work. I work for the Global Marine and Polar Program, and mainly we've been for some years now developing the Close the Plastic Tap program. So the reason for this name is that we are mostly focused on closing the sources and trying to understand the sources where the leakage occurs, and not so much fighting the plastics as a global movement. So our work is very related with identification, quantification of the sources, and try to understand how do you act upon them. This is for you to have more or less an idea on the regions that we're working, because our work started some years ago, and we worked from ice impacts or possible impacts in ice formation and melting. So research up in the polar regions in Canada and in Sweden. We have grant mechanisms in Southeast Asia through some projects. We've done national footprint of plastic in several regions. So we have a big scope when it comes to plastic, but we've been more focused more and more in trying to have an holistic approach on how do we deal with plastic pollution as a whole, not focusing specifically in one point, trying to understand the sources, and more when we understand the sources, where the solution comes from. Because there's a point when you know you have to measure, you know you have to quantify, but where does the knowledge is enough for you to actually move into actions. And we've been working together with our EU office through Alberto, trying to understand where policy comes into place. So what we try to do is try to reframe the issue of plastics, try to understand that everything that is in the ocean comes from land, but from land exactly from where. We do a lot of we use a lot of data analytics to do this work, and then through economic and policy assessments try to convey the best solutions per country when we're talking about the national projects. This is a bit of the work we've been doing, summarized in reports. In 2020, we launched a review of all the plastic footprints that were out there. So it's a state-of-the-art review and trying to understand what's out there. How do you measure? Because this is very important, trying to understand if in Japan things are being measured differently, and how do you harmonize all this data? If we ever put all this data in one platform, how do we harmonize this data and make sure that the data in one country is relevant to the other? So when it comes to solutions, the solutions need to, of course, be global, but with a specific regional focus. So we launched the marine plastic footprint, which is our footprint. And we launched also both the two reports that show up at the end, the Plasticus Mare Balticum and the Mediterranean Mare Plasticum. Both of them relate to projects where we try to measure, quantify all plastic waste that was generated per country, per polymer type, per pathway to arrive to the ocean, and per year. So the idea is that we start to have a matrix of where the polymers are more used and try to understand how do you close those sources per country. So we did this for the entire riparian countries in the Baltic and for the entire riparian countries in the Mediterranean. Not only riparian in the case of the Med, but also the ones that contribute to the watershed. This goes from Switzerland, although a landlocked country, all the way down to Sudan. Because they both contribute to affluence to this major source of this pollution. We do a lot of quantification, but with quantification with the purpose, already mentioned by Alberto, what we did, trying to understand the sources, so trying to understand then where you act upon them. And this is where the interesting part becomes when we start to understand that plastic is needed, but carries its own problems. And the fact that you need it for some functions, probably don't need for some others. So it's not that all plastic is bad or all plastic is good. It's trying to understand where it's needed and where it's still needed, but there's no solution. What do you do? What are the solutions? What are the possibilities? What type of plastics or other types of polymers, non-plastic, that you can use to substitute? We launched also the National Guidance on Plastic Pollution Hotspotting and Shaping Action, together with Life Cycle Initiative, Quantis, EI, and UNEP. And the idea is that you focus first on identification of national hotspots, but then how do you address them? How do you define which areas you should focus first? This leads me brings me to the next slide that I would like to present, and this is the main part of the presentation. We have launched, with the support of Norwegian Aid Corporation, a big project in two main regions. And then with the support of Primat Foundation, we launched also this for the third region. So originally the project started to be developed in the Caribbean region, and also in the Pacific, where we tried to understand that small island developing states are highly affected by plastic waste, and trying to understand which sectors within those small island developing states, or which ones are the main contributors to plastic pollution. So we have to understand and we differentiate. One thing is plastic waste generation, and the other thing is leakage. So where do we differentiate? And very simply, I open a bag of cookies, I eat all the cookies, the package is not used for its primary function, meaning that I just generated plastic waste. If I open the window and the plastic flows outside, I generated leakage. This is the main difference. So what we try to do in these small island developing states, so Antigua, Barbuda, St. Lucia and Grenada in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, we have Suva, Vanuatu, and Fiji, and in the Mediterranean, we have Menorca and Cyprus, is that we have a snapshot of all the plastic that is generated per sector, and we work mainly with three sectors: tourism, fisheries, and waste management. So we have a snapshot, and then we do a material flow analysis to understand what part of this plastic can be diverged, segregated, separated, and being recycled or preferably upcycled, and the one that cannot be, and what are the solutions for this. Of course, we need to understand that we need to have a business case for each of these big chunks of, what do you do with this? You have to have a specific reason, a specific economical reason to move in one country where the amount of plastic that you have to generate, for instance, electricity makes sense in this country, but doesn't make sense in the other country. So we're being supported by the economics and policy component in the project. And the full idea is that at the end, we come up not only with solutions and try to address how to deal all the plastic waste that is generated in a specific region. And all of these lessons learned from all these 8 countries, small island developing states, are put into a blueprint, which is a scalable, replicable model on how to address the waste from a perspective of an island in this case. So overarching goal is to drive circular economy agenda on islands, reducing the consumption of plastic, reusing where possible, converting where needed or possible also. And the whole idea is to actually come with this, as I mentioned, this scalable blueprint that could be used across any other region. Specifically in Menorca, because the Menorca and Cyprus, it's the Mediterranean chapter of the plastic waste-free island. We are very advanced in the project, in spite of all these related COVID issues that in some countries we had to pull back our consultants and a lot of the work we've been doing. We've developed quite a substantial part of the work. We are very advanced in terms of the policy assessments, where we then come with recommendations, working obviously with stakeholders, because we don't work solo in silos, and we need the cooperation of all stakeholders. So for now, it's just also to stress the fact that we are always looking to enlarge our stakeholder group, because it's the best way to achieve results. Pretty much this would be the presentation in a way that I can show and showcase the work we've been doing across the globe when it comes to plastic. Showed briefly the fact that we were focused very much in working locally with more needed economies, in this case, small and developing states, not only on advising after a quantification process, but also helping towards solutions. And the idea is that these solutions can create new value chains and generate jobs within those islands. And also with policy advice when it comes to import some types of material that some small and developing states are now importing. And then when they import it, they don't understand that actually once the material is used, there's nothing to do with it. And landfill is like the least preferred option at this point. We are now also advancing into establishing a global visualization platform that would be interesting from the point of view that all this data needs to be gathered under one platform that a country could finally understand how much leakage they're responsible for. And if you can translate this leakage or even this first plastic waste generation into economic impacts. So the full idea is that once you have a snapshot of all the plastic waste that is generated in one country, telling you that this country produces 10, 20, 100, a million, a gazillion tons, it's not as relevant as saying that your country, because it mismanaged plastic during a full year, it lost the capacity to build 2 hospitals or 3 schools, because this is when you start to make the sum of all the impacts that are generated by mismanaged plastic, from biodiversity loss, nature loss, entanglement in boats, tourism loss because tourists prefer to go to other places. When we put all these impacts into context, you understand how much money you didn't realize, you had the possibility to realize, and you didn't because you mismanaged plastic. So this is the full idea of a platform that will help to visualize this type of impacts. I think, yeah, probably I'm still in my time. So thank you very much. And thank you again for the opportunity to make this presentation.
Thank you very much, Joao, for your presentation for this case study. And we are quite on time, actually, but I wouldn't like to extend any further, so we can cover the questions, potential questions and discussion in the final bit of the webinar. So I would like to give the floor to Odey Garcia Garin, who is a researcher at the University of Barcelona and will present the Interact Med MedSiliter project. Odey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fernando. I will share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep, perfectly.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Odey Garcia Garin, and I am a PhD student at the University of Barcelona. The main topic of my PhD is the impact of marine litter on the marine fauna. And now I am going to present some results of the MedSiliter project, a new Interact Med project that joined 11 partners from 4 countries: Greece, France, Italy, and Spain. The project finished last year. Reduction of marine litter is globally acknowledged as a major community challenge of our times due to its significant environmental, economic, social, political, and cultural implications. Marine litter is one of the main causes of sea pollution and it is dominated by plastics. Its monitoring has become a global priority, being recommended or legally required within international, regional, and national programs worldwide. In this framework, the main objective of the MedSiliter project were, first, to protect and promote Mediterranean natural and cultural resources, and secondly, to maintain biodiversity and natural ecosystems through the management and networking of marine protected areas. To reach these objectives, these objectives were reached by developing Mediterranean-specific protocols to protect biodiversity from litter impact at basin and local MPA scales, and studying and testing new techniques to monitor marine litter and its impacts in the Mediterranean Sea. But before, we have been talking about the Circular Economy Action Plan and the European Green Deal, and how the MedSiliter project fits within them. As you might know, plastic consumption is expected to double in the coming 20 years. Consequently, single-use products will be phased out and intentionally added microplastics will be restricted. Therefore, we are going to need to assess changes due to mitigation measures and other new legislative initiatives. So we need to standardize the monitoring protocols of marine litter. We needed the MedSiliter project. The main legislative framework currently in place to protect the marine ecosystem and biodiversity within European seas was set in 2008, with adoption by the European Commission of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. Following the legislative requirements, monitoring programs should collect information on, first, the amount, the distribution, and the composition of litter, the rates at which litter enters the environment and the sources, third, the spatial and temporal variations, and finally, the impacts of litter on the marine fauna. Monitoring protocols need to adapt to the information required. This is the goal of monitoring. So marine litter monitoring is indeed functional to evaluate trends. Second, identify accumulation areas, both seasonal and regional. And identify pathways and geographical sources. In addition, to assess changes due to mitigation measures, thanks to the long-term monitoring, and finally, to provide information to evaluate risks and focus research and mitigation policies on specifically sensitive areas for marine biodiversity. The MedSiliter project focused in 2 types of litter. The floating marine macrolitter, this is litter larger than 2.5 centimeters that is floating on the sea, and the ingested litter by the marine fauna. For an effective monitoring, the variables to be collected include the number of items, the size class, the composition and the type, and geographical position, apart from environmental parameters related with the geographical position. This is winds, currents, proximity to land, and many other parameters. The coverage may also influence the detectability and the identification of items and must be taken into consideration. So the MaxiLiter project tests all these variables and coverages to make an effective protocol to monitor floating marine macrolitter and the ingested litter by the marine fauna. Now I am going to present some results of the MaxiLiter project. In the first case, we assess the monitoring of marine litter by drones. Firstly, we perform a set of experiments in the Western Mediterranean to define the optimal monitoring parameters to be used within marine litter drone surveys. Then, we applied the protocol in marine protected areas such as the Cap de Creus and other areas in front of Barcelona. You can see in the map the surveys that we conducted. And in the two photos on the bottom, some images of the surveys with the catamaran and the landing of the drone. Now I am going to show you a video in which we present the marine litter monitoring by drones.
Drones can be used to monitor photographically small and medium-sized areas. For small-scale monitoring, like marine protected area routine monitoring, simple and relatively cheap instruments can be used, like those provided within the series DJI Mavic or DJI Phantom. The material for drone surveys can be prepared and checked easily before going to the field. As the average time flight of each set of batteries is approximately 20 minutes, for marine monitoring you should have some extra battery sets charged. If you are willing to fly the drone from a boat, you will also need to bring an adequate charger. You must have a memory card large enough to save high-resolution videos and photos. We suggest to bring some extra memory cards or a hard drive and laptop to download images after each flight. The camera and lenses mounted on the drone can be very different. According to the resolution of the camera, you may fly your drone at higher or lower altitudes. Once the drone is mounted, you have to get the remote control ready. This must be connected to a tablet so that you can fly the drone manually or according to a previously planned flight. Through the tablet, you will also be able to see the images and video recorded live from the drone. Flights can be planned through different programs, which have all similar functions. You need first to have downloaded a map of the area. When you are on the field, you may have limited connection, so we suggest to do that beforehand. Once ready, you can start a new mission. You have to draw your survey area manually. Then, you can select the flight height in order to reach a resolution of 2 cm per pixel. This resolution allows to detect floating objects of a size larger than 15 or 20 centimeters. Then, in advanced options, you will have to set the overlap between images, which should be approximately 15% between subsequent and parallel images. Before saving, you will have to check the duration of the flight. Each drone may have a different endurance, but with a Mavic or a Phantom, the flight duration shouldn't exceed 15 or 20 minutes. If the flight is too long, you can reduce the area of the survey. Once all parameters are set, the mission can be saved. Before flying, you can check on the program the number of transects, the duration and length of the flight, and the number of photos taken. The same programs can be used with other types of drones. If you ever change model, you just have to set it in the program. When everything is ready, you can fly to your drone from land or from different types of vessels, including motor and sailing boats. If you fly from a small boat, you will need the help of a person who should keep the drone steady before taking off and grab it firmly when landing.
Okay, in the second case, we assess the monitoring of floating marine litter by large, medium, and small-sized vessels. This monitoring can be coupled to marine fauna monitoring to reduce cost. In the figure on the left, you can see all the surveys conducted within the Metziliter project. The dark lines represent the ferry surveys, and you can see as well the drone surveys and the aircraft surveys. In the figure on the right, you can see some parameters that were defined for the optimal monitoring, such as the velocity, the strip width, or the number of observers. For example, for the monitoring using large ferries, the strip width was defined to be 15 meters. However, for the small vessels, the strip width was defined to be 5 or 6 meters. In the third case, we determined an indicator species of microplastic pollution, which was selected to guarantee a wide coverage across the Mediterranean. Criteria for the selection of target species for monitoring microplastic ingestion in the Mediterranean include the species distribution across the Mediterranean basin, gut length, home range, and agility, commercial value, and the documented occurrence of marine litter in its gut content. At local scale, for example, inside MPAs, the target species should reflect the environmental conditions in which they have been collected. After assessing several fish species, we choose the bogue as a suitable bioindicator of microplastic pollution. Then we analyze over 800 bogues using a common methodological protocol. Half of the bogues were from protected areas. The spatial heterogeneity of the abundance of ingested microplastic was mainly related to the degree of coastal anthropogenic pressure at the sampling size, further supporting the bogue as a bioindicator of microplastic pollution. In the figure on the bottom, you can see two microplastics found in the gastrointestinal tract of the bogues. The first one was polypropylene and the second one polyethylene. They were analyzed by FTIR, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. The main results of the project were used in training and transferring workshops addressed to Mediterranean MPAs and stakeholders. And also, the protocol will be used for the revision of the EU guidance on marine litter monitoring in European seas. The figure on the left is the protocol. Then if you are interested in it, you can send me an email and I will gladly send it to you. Okay, to sum up, the Metziliter project developed standard monitoring protocols to protect biodiversity from litter impact. That data set obtained within the implementation of the Metziliter project allowed the definition of the most important settings needed to guarantee the consistency of data collection and thus improve the comparability of results obtained across monitoring plans worldwide. Secondly, the monitoring of marine litter is essential to evaluate risks and mitigation policies. Furthermore, to understand the possible sources and pathways through the environment and to promote new legislative initiatives against plastics. And last but not least, the MPA managers are the key component to conduct a regular marine litter monitoring within the marine protected areas. Here in this slide, you can see some articles that have been published within the Metziliter project. And if you are interested in any of them, you can email me and I will send them to you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Odey, for this presentation of the Metziliter project. And thanks everybody for the questions that we have collected in the chat box. Just a reminder, we will share with you the presentations of this webinar via email. So we'll do the same with the recordings as well. And I would like to, well, we are entering the last part of the webinar. We will answer some of the questions, and we will open the discussion for participants if we have the time. And I would like to give the floor to Stefania Petrosillo, who is the policy officer at Europarc Federation based in Brussels, who will be facilitating the debate. Stefania, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Good morning to everybody. As Fernando said, I am the policy officer in Brussels. At the moment, not in the office, as a lot of you. And I will be supported by my colleague Lisona, who is collecting your questions in the chat. The questions are a lot, so I would suggest first to collect some questions to our speakers, and then maybe a second round. And if you have time, we can also open the microphone and to share directly some questions by you. My question, Fernando, at what time we need to finish exactly? How much time we have for the debate?
We have around half an hour for this part of the webinar. We can extend it a bit longer if needed, but yeah, it will be good if we can stick to the time.
Okay, so we will try to be concise, and this is also my request to the speakers, please. I would like to start to Michael. Of course, the Commission is receiving a lot of questions, and this is also an important moment for the people working on the field to interact with the people working in Brussels and European institutions. And this is a part indeed of our IUCN and Europarc work. We really would like to create this bridge as much as possible. So the question for Michael, I would like to start. This is a question for Michael, but also Alberto, if you want to add something, please do. So we speak about circular economy. The question is, I would like to know, how can you identify a policy intervention related to plastic as circular or not? This can cause a bit of confusion, since, for example, a bundle of plastics is sometimes not seen as a circular economy intervention. Are there any guidance for this? Please, Michael, and then Alberto, if you want to add something.
Thank you for the question. Well, I will try to reply. As far as I know, there is no, by the way, the action plan is not a legislative, it's not a legal document. It's a communication by the Commission. So do not expect any scientific and rigid definition about what is circular and what is not circular. But I think we need to rely on common sense. Circularity is about preservation of resources and about reduction of the environmental impact. Depending now on the case, we might have let's say, a stronger dimension in terms of preservation of resources, to save material, to reuse, to recycle, and so on and so forth. Or we might move towards the aspect of environmental protection. But again, there are no strict and rigid criteria. But the two guiding principles are preservation of resources and raw materials. Of course, resources includes energy and so on and so forth, includes water, and all this is in circular economy, and reduction of environmental impact in all kinds of, let's say, phases of the life cycle of a product or in all kinds of processes. This is how I would put it. It's quite broad.
Yes, if I may add.
Alberto, please.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, as Michael says, it's a little bit of common sense here, but of course some actions, one could wonder how circular they are. And in particular, if there is a product that ends its cycle once it's used only once, it's difficult to argue that that's circular. So that's kind of an easy one when it comes to the single-use plastic, as it was mentioned in the question. But there is also something that now Michael was mentioning about environmental protection. And there is something that we have to also remember all the time. Sometimes, or a number of times, the economy starts with the raw materials, and sometimes it starts in nature. And if it finishes in nature, that's the circularity. Maybe we could even consider restoration as even part of the circular economy discussion. And that's actually something that we are bringing into the coordination group of the circular economy stakeholder platform discussion now. I am now a member of it. So we want to also introduce the nature and nature-based solutions and nature in general restoration and protection as part of the discussion on circular economy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Another question again for Michael. This is a question for my part. Sorry for the speaker, for the participant, but I think it's important also to see how the European Commission think to coordinate all these different intervention policies, laws, etc., because the topic is very complex, as you explained in your presentation. Which sort of mechanism there are to coordinate all these input and laws and policies, etc.?
Well, the mechanisms are inherent, let's say, in our way of working internally in the Commission, because we consult each other. We need to prepare very carefully any proposal or any policy instrument. And of course, when we go to the Council and the Parliament, there is also a discussion about how, to which extent is this needed? Is this new, what we propose, and so on and so forth. But to be more concrete and short at the same time, I will give you a very good example, a very good illustration of synergies between policies, as I mentioned in my presentation, between the Marine Strategy Framework Directive and the Single-Use Plastic Directive. The Marine Strategy Framework Directive produced the data for the Single-Use Plastic Directive. Through the Single-Use Plastic Directive and the monitoring mechanisms it has, we will be able to see how effective, how much has each litter been reduced thanks to the Single-Use Plastic Directive. And again, of course, we will need to monitor in the marine monitoring the products that the Single-Use Plastic Directive is targeting. And then our monitoring will also show whether we need to include other products, new products in the Single-Use Plastic Directive in 2027. So you see there the interaction, but this is only one example of interaction. There are many others.
Perfect, thank you. And now I would like to ask to Joao and Odey some questions that we received for both of them. So the first question is about how to involve a fisherman. One person asked how this sort of intervention that you planned, you presented in your project, how can be implemented by fisher? It will be producer company responsibility, fisherman will need an insurance to cover this removing and so on. So the role of fishermen, and please, who want to start? Joao maybe, or Odey?
For Joao, I think, no? The question?
Pardon?
It's for Joao, the question?
Joao? For Joao, but also Odey if you want to.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'll start by saying we're now actually starting a prototype in one of the small island developing states on trying to understand how can we, in a way, extend circular economy from the point of view of fishing nets. And the work would be between producers directly and consumers, in this case, fishermen. What type of bring back scheme can we use? How do you put incentives into fishermen to stop buying more cheap fish nets if he doesn't have to buy the ones that last more? So we're trying to understand what type of bring back schemes we can do in a small island developing state, starting with the manufacturers accepting the material back directly, and alongside this, having some considerations about whatever chemical tagging already exists out there for very low cost. So we understand that whenever a fish net is found, even if it was not reported, because if you lose a net, you can always report it. If you cut it and you let it loose, then we need to understand who did it, because ghost fish nets, as you know, is a big problem. So trying to understand two things: if this approach using this bring back scheme from the part of fishermen, or the manufacturers collecting this directly because they will use this possibly as raw material or not. trying to understand if it's possible to do this, and also having the chemical tagging for fish nets that are lost. I'm not sure I answered the question, but would I please feel free to.
Well, I think that fishermen are aware that nowadays they are fishing more marine litter than fish. So I think that we have to change something to fix it, because it's not possible to continue in this way. So yeah, I think maybe the fundings should go to clean the ocean and to start having a better sea, because it's not, the situation is not good now.
Yeah, and I don't know, Dave, if you want to add something. There is a question about not only fishes, but also mussels and other filtering species.
Yeah, we studied microplastics in stranded turtles as well, sea turtles, because on fishes we studied the microplastics, and on sea turtles we studied the macroplastics. So we had two bioindicator species, one for micro, another for macro plastics. And we didn't test on mussels, but well, there are a lot of studies testing microplastics on mussels, and well, they had a lot.
Okay, very well, thank you. And now a question connected again to involving other sectors. I resume some input received in the chat, some questions, is about private sector involvement, producer of plastic or recycling plastic, etc. So it's a question for the three speakers from the field, from the policy. How do you see this point? I think, Joao, would you like to start from your experience?
If you can you reframe the question, please?
The involvement of private sector. How we can involve a private sector as producers of plastic.
Well, in this yes. case, there's no, as you know, there's no private sector. The private sector is like a big umbrella. So you need to go to specific sectors. In this case, as Alberto was mentioning, we're already involved with the Tire Manufacturer Association. Now it depends a lot. For instance, I had this discussion before, and the idea, for instance, when we address road paint, when you address painting of big infrastructures that have a lot of plastic, is how do you, for instance, let's a very small example. I'm talking with someone that is as a company that puts ink and to do the road marks in highways, whatever it is. And I say, why are you using plastic? And because things need to be durable. I need something to last 20 years or 30, I don't know. So that's why you put plastic. So what, is it possible that you use another polymer that degrades a bit faster and is not so toxic, is not blah, blah, blah. And I said, yes, it's possible, but then again, it will last less. And then I said, well, from your economic perspective, then you can sell it twice, right? Because if you last half of the time, actually it's a good business for you. So I'm just giving a stupid, very, very stupid example, just to say that it's a case by case this sector, and the approach that if you understand some polymers can be replaced or not, what is your way forward? So this can for instance, giving a certain example, in one island, we understand that they were importing water, and someone decided, why do we import water? Why don't we just bottle the water that we have here, which is great. So they started a whole factory on producing blow molding bottled waters, and they bottle the water, and then they sell the water locally because the population do not trust municipal water. So we want to talk with them and say, you know that at the end, all your bottles are ending up in landfills or just in rivers somewhere. Why don't you have a bring back scheme, a deposit like some countries in Europe have, but in a way that from that bottle, you can do free forms to do another blow molding up to 6-7 times because it's food graded plastic. And in this case, you close your loop for your bottle factory. And it was very well received. And actually then we talk with him and we look at the system of palette where it makes a distribution of water across the entire island. So we come up with one specific solution for his company. But this needs to be a case-by-case scenario.
Uday, would you like to add something according to your experience? Do you have any comment?
Well, yeah, I think it's difficult to involve them, but it's a necessity because we need their help. Because if we are producing plastic in the way that we are doing now, it's impossible to stop. So we need their help.
Definitely. Michael, the Commission perspective.
Yes. Well, producers have a very important role to play because they have the technical knowledge, because they have the financial resources, and because they have a very clear, how should I say, social or societal role, in the sense that they are directly, they have the direct contact with the consumer, they influence the consumer habits, and so on and so forth. It's a big discussion, but just to give you an example, in the European legislation and policies, we recognize and establish this link. As I showed in my presentation, we have now this notion of extended producer responsibility, which pre-existed, of course, let's say, the plastics, the standards for plastics and so on, and was already in the Waste Framework Directive. But now, since 2018, this principle has acquired a very prominent position in the waste management legislation. I showed you the example of fishing gear. 5 years ago, it was unthinkable to impose extended producer responsibility to fishing gear producers. Now it happens. And not only that, as I said, there's a link between the economic aspects and the technical aspects, because we encourage producers to design products which are more easily recyclable, which are more circular, to give an example. I'll come back to the previous question. And this is done by modulating the fees, because as a producer, you will have to contribute to an extended producer responsibility scheme in your member state, and you will have to pay less if your products are more easily recycled. So again, producers have a key role to play for a number of reasons, and we try to take that into account as well as possible in our legislation and policies.
Thank you. I see that there are several technical questions concerning the project of Uday, Joao. I maybe suggest to, if you can put your email in the chat so people can, because I don't know if we will have time to enter in details, so people can address to you directly to have more information about your project directly. And another question that I would like to ask, especially to Joao Uday, but also Michael, your advice is very welcome. Which kind of skills and knowledge do you think that the managers of marine protected areas have to know, to manage effectively this issue? I can say something more so you can think about it, because as Europarc, we are very involved in try to implement the knowledge and the skills of managers. So we are really preparing a lot of trainings for them, also with the European Commission support. So for us, it's very important to identify the need of these different topics. So who want to start? Joao, maybe? Again.
Okay, let me try to understand. Your question is what type of skills managers from protected areas should have? Well, all of them.
Definitely.
All of them. I mean,
all of them.
honestly, of course, you can put more emphasis in biology or in statistical or into, but I think that it needs to be well balanced, because the issue is that when we think about this, we are very raised into a specific direction. We tend to see the bigger picture, which is, I mentioned this before. If people tell me we have 100,000 tons, I don't really see them. Even when we create an image like we have 3 African elephants being dumped every year, it's still difficult for me to see. One of the ways, and I realized this a long time ago, is when we talk with some people, you have to address financially and translate into these losses into actually potential loss in terms of investment. What are you losing by not doing this? Where when you allow this type of pollution, what are we talking about? And this is actually very difficult to have this subset of skills. For instance, when we talk about biodiversity loss or impacts, and let's assume the loss of a turtle, which is bad. We lose a turtle, that's fine. But even if you sit 4 people in one table to discuss the value of a turtle, you have 4 different values. One does like turtles because they smell. One loves turtles because turtles are nice to show to the kids. The third one actually enjoyed turtle because he already eat one. And there's another one that always loved turtles because it's the symbol of his football club. You understand? So it's very difficult, even from the perspective of having this, let's say, financial loss per species, very difficult. So a subset of skills that they need was being sensitive, understanding about biology, economics, policy, and where you cannot have this subset of skills, surround yourself with a stakeholder group that can allow you to reach all of these
Of course, this is definitely also capacity to work in team with different knowledge. Of course, Odey, in your experience, concretely, what the managers need to know?
Yeah, well, I agree with Joao, but in the case of marine litter monitoring, yeah, I think that they have to be trained, because if you perform marine litter monitoring without training, you don't get the same results. We test this with trained volunteers and with untrained volunteers, and the results of densities and abundance and types of marine litter were different. So LPA's managers should be trained to perform the monitoring of marine litter.
Okay, thank you. Michael, your comment, and also another question for you, so you will keep the floor, is about possible funding from European Union. We have seen some very interesting project, but in general, could you give us some tips for the participant where is possible to find support among the program of European Union to manage, especially for marine protected areas, to manage this issue? Michael.
Yes, thank you. Well, as far as the skills of the MPA manager are concerned, I'm afraid I cannot give much information. I have no direct, let's say, experience or practice with that, but I can certainly refer to the results of our projects. You heard Odell, Medicine Litter is one, and I mentioned another 2 that I know of, big projects, Act for Litter in the Mediterranean and plastic busters, also in the Mediterranean. But I think the outcomes of these projects, which I know are also dealing with awareness raising, training, workshops, and so on, they could be transferable to other regions as well. And this brings me to your other question, financing mechanisms. There are, as I said, there are already many projects financed by the EU related to marine litter. Several of them are directly related to the marine protected areas, by a number of variety of funding, let's say, possibilities. It can be, depending, of course, on the nature of the project. It can be a live project. If it's more than demonstration side, it can be a research and development project, Horizon Europe, if it's more on the research side. Both Medicine Litter and Act for Litter and Plastic Busters are projects, all 3, which are financed by Interreg, which brings me to the regional funding. Interreg, of course, is something that is managed by the so-called managing authorities. I'm not an expert on that, but okay, the member states are involved, but the Commission has a very important role. But there is a much larger portfolio in terms of regional funding at national level. For example, just to give you one example, the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, but also the cohesion funding in terms of, let's say, environmental protection. But again, we encourage the member states to use this money that they have under their direct, so to speak, national competence for environmental protection also. But the pressure must come also from, let's say, the local communities and the local stakeholders. There's a lot of regional funds which can be used for this purpose as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We have some other questions, but I think we don't have time. Fernando, I think we agreed already to collect our questions and to try to find a way to answer to them in the following days in some way.
Yes, I think that will be a good option. We can collect the questions and address the speakers, and we will publish the questions, so the answers to the questions that were not solved, or send them to you by email. So I think we can conclude the webinar here.
I don't know if Alberto would like to say something, and then Fernando will close the meeting.
Thank you very much, Stefania.
Of course, was very interesting for me, and I learned a lot because this is a topic that I don't follow too much, so it was very, very useful for me. Alberto.
Thank you very much. I will just keep it really short. That was exactly the idea, Stefania, so I'm happy to hear it from your side, and I hope it was the same for everybody. These are two, in principle, not that much connected agendas, let's say, but as we were saying from the very beginning, the whole idea here is integration and to learn about everything. Also, as Joao was saying, the whole idea, the ideal protected area manager will be a very, very skilled person. We try to do our best and to become as better as we can in our daily work, and I think that these kind of sessions can help to learn a little bit. So hope it was helpful. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to all the speakers. It was a really, really nice occasion to have these different perspectives, and thanks to all the participants that showed their interest in attending this webinar. So I wouldn't like to extend any further. And as I said before, you will receive the webinar recordings and webinar presentations by email. And please keep posted of future webinars that we will be organizing in the coming months. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a good day.